Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.
Welcome to another edition of Egberto Off the Record. Today, we are honored to have with us Greg Palast. Greg Palast is known for his investigative reports for The Guardian and bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg Palast's new film about the latest attacks on the right to vote that bent this election. It's called Vigilantes, Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen, narrated by Rosario Dawson and produced by Martin Sheen, Leonardo DiCaprio. It has released the film for free streaming at gregpalast.com. Hey, Greg, how you doing this morning?
Glad to be with you again, Egberto.
Well, you know, I always like to interview because you always have something new for the audience. And this time around, it's a blog piece that you wrote that I want to say tickled my fancy. You wrote a piece titled, "I was on the phone with RFK Jr. when he lost his mind." And I don't want us to get into this immediately because I want to get a few more people on beforehand. So why don't you tell a little bit about your experiences and what you do, and then we'll get into that specific blog afterward.
Okay, for those who don't know Greg Palast, you can tell by my hat that I'm an investigative reporter, which I did for many years for The Guardian out of England, BBC Television, Rolling Stone, and now, by the way, I'm now a columnist with Raw Story. But you can find all my reports at gregpalast.com. Now, many of you know me from the best-selling book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, the film of the same name, and right now we've got this film out, which you can stream for free on either YouTube or just go to gregpalast.com and get the links there. And, you can get my investigative reports. Now, the film Vigilantes is about something very, very dangerous, important, scary, and frightening that's going on right now under Agent Orange, your president, which is that the laws in many states, including Georgia, and they're trying to expand this everywhere, allow for individuals, vigilantes, self-appointed vote fraud hunters, to challenge people and say, you can't vote. Now, understand, this was a plan first adopted by the Ku Klux Klan in 1946. So Trump and his gang are using a Ku Klux Klan method that where in 1946, the Ku Klux Klan in Georgia incorporated itself as Vigilantes, Inc. And what they did was they went around and challenged every black person on the voter rolls. They filled out challenge forms. Don't let Egberto Willies vote because he's not a legal voter. Well, they've now taken the white sheets, they put them into spreadsheets, and now Jim Crow's gone into cyberspace. So the Trump organization, True the Vote, the Trump-allied organization, True the Vote, they're the ones, by the way, Charlie Kirk was part of that organization. What they did was come up with lists of literally millions of people, overwhelmingly people of color, to challenge their vote. In other words, Greg Palast can say Egberto Willies shouldn't be allowed to vote. Then Egberto has to go into an office, county office, to prove you're a citizen and prove you live where you live, and then they'll let you vote. And so in the film, Vigilantes, I have, for example, Major Gamaliel Turner. He's the top Pentagon consultant. He was assigned to a base in California. They didn't send him his ballot from Georgia, and an African-American officer, they refused because they said, Mr. Turner, when he called and said, where's my absentee ballot? They said, you've been challenged. He said, well, what do I do? He said, no problem. You just come into our offices. He said, so wait a minute. I have to go 2,500 miles from California to get my ballot? You talk to fools like that. He says, I know what you're doing. Of course he knows what he's doing because his father was the co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with Martin Luther King. So it's this mass challenge. He and 4,000 others in the Fort Benning area, mostly black soldiers, were denied their ballots and could not vote in the Georgia elections. And this is one of the big reasons why Trump, after losing Georgia, then he wins it, because they literally removed voters by the thousands and thousands and thousands. And that was the margin for Trump in Georgia. And that was the margin, and they've taken this operation to Florida, everywhere else. So if you want to see the film, it's entertaining. Grab some popcorn. Hey, you can't lose. Rosario Dawson is narrating. That alone should be exciting enough. And introduced by Martin Sheen, my favorite president, President Bartlett. And just go to gregpalast.com and get the story.
So check that out, guys. Check that out. But anyway, today, however, and I think your assistant put the link to the blog that you wrote at gregpalast.com called "I Was on the Phone with RFK Jr. When He Lost Your Mind." I mean, let me tell you something, Greg. Talking about titles of blog posts, you know how to do it, brother, because I am scrolling through all the stuff that I read every day. And as soon as I got to that title, it was like capturing, and I had to read it. Tell us a little bit about you, before you talk about specifically that incident. You worked with RFK Jr. on quite a few things. Tell us a little bit about that.
For years, Bobby Kennedy, Bobby was my co-author and partner and friend. And we wrote articles for Rolling Stone together. He introduced my books. He wrote a chapter for one of my books. We even did, with Jesse Jackson, we did the number one best-selling comic book in America, adult comic book for a while, which was Steal Back Your Vote, on protecting your vote. Very progressive. He's a leader of the environmental movement, a professor of environmental law at Pace University. Sharp guy, very, very progressive, and very brilliant. And I was very happy to work with him as a co-author, and we worked on these activist issues in environment, voting rights, you name it. He was on my program on BBC television quite often. I brought him in as a guest. So we were close, we hung out, and then things went bad.
Now, I think you said you noticed it first went bad for that big explosion from BP, I think, in the Gulf of Mexico, right?
Yeah. So what happened was, and this was one incident, but it was kind of one of the final incidents. Something seemed to be going wrong with his brain. And I, by the way, just so you know, it's not very comfortable to talk about your friend's mental problems. I mean, who does that? But in his case, he's inviting America to participate in his psychosis. He is harming people. You have to understand the stakes here. Otherwise, I would not be talking to you about my friend. But when you kill, he didn't just kill off vaccines. People are so focused on that. He stopped all the research on the mRNA, not only vaccines, but mRNA
research. Yeah.
All the research. Now understand, mRNA was our way to get a possible vaccine to stop cancer. We finally had something that looked like a cancer vaccine. And this guy literally, he didn't say, well, the research shows that it's dangerous or bad or not effective. He simply stopped the research. What are you afraid of, Bobby, with research? We're losing thousands of scientists. This is dangerous. And I got to tell you, look, I'm going to be honest. I'm in my 70s. I know I look like I'm in my 20s, but hey,
you're
in my 70s, I have one lung. If I get COVID, without a vaccine, I'm a dead man. So, Bobby, you are putting my life in danger. You're putting a lot of people's lives in danger. 1 million people died in America from COVID because we had a president telling people to drink bleach and whatever, and use something called ivermectin, like quack stuff. People died because of this. And I'm very, very concerned. So that's why. Now, going back to your question, when I first started noticing, when it really got really bad, when it really hit the final point, if you remember, there was an explosion in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon. A British petroleum rig blew up in the Gulf and incinerated 11 people. We smeared 1,500 miles of coast with the oil. It was a horror show. And what I found out is working for British outlets, The Guardian and Channel 4 Television Britain, I uncovered that, in fact, British Petroleum had the same explosion. And if you go to my book, Vulture's Picnic, you go to my website, you'll see it. The same explosion happened on a BP rig in the Caspian Sea. but they covered it up. And in fact, the executives from the oil companies like Exxon and Chevron and British Petroleum told the United States Congress they'd never had a blow up. They never had a blow up
Right.
until the Deepwater Horizon. That's not true. 17 months before, they had the same exact thing. They covered it up. It's a hell of a story. We put it on prime time air in Britain and all over the world. It was in, top of the news in France and Switzerland and Italy and, like I say, the UK, South America. It never made it into the United States.
Well, let me stop you
except
there.
on one.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Why didn't that story make it here in America? That news story.
Because they were doing their best to cover up for these oil companies. Our Secretary of State,
Right.
Condoleezza Rice, covered up the story of the explosion. Remember, Chevron named it an oil tanker after her. So they covered it up. And I found out some of this information, by the way, from insiders, but also WikiLeaks. And was confirmed by looking at State Department cables that they knew about the explosion and the State Department covered it up. So, but here's the point about Bobby. He knew all about the story. He was working with me on it. He actually got on BBC television worldwide to talk about the case. He reviewed my book, and I did get into the United States on a program called Ring of Fire. It was Bobby Kennedy, and we were on the air an hour talking about this, and my book Vulture's Picnic, which had the story in it, and then we were supposed to have a press conference about it, and then Bobby calls me from California. He's in his convertible with Cheryl Hines, his wife, and says, "Greg, I'm canceling the press conference because apparently this story, you put this story out before." I said, "No, Bobby, we put it out, you and me. Remember, we were on the air for an hour, and then we were on BBC television when you wrote about it and you talked. I mean, Bobby, do you remember?" And he doesn't remember anything. And this kept happening where just basic things that were very, very strange, where it seemed like his brain was going off. Now, what I didn't know is that he had an actual live worm in his brain, eating away at his brain. Now, look, I don't speak worm. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if what that meant in terms of his mental condition. I also know, look, let's face it, this guy's had traumatic life. Trauma, yes, he's privileged as a Kennedy, but his head blown off on television. His son died, his wife. And I think the real thing that broke him, and, I'm not a psychologist, but, I could see it as a friend when his wife committed suicide. She called him up, and right after they spoke, she killed herself, and she had severe problems. I won't go into it. It's personal. She hung herself. It was horrible. And Bobby was blamed in the tabloids. So imagine you're going to your wife's funeral, the mother of your children, and you open the tabloids and they talk about how you killed your wife. I mean, and his kids have to read that stuff. So, you can imagine. So he's had a lot of trauma. He has good reasons to have psychological problems. The worm, I don't know what else. But Bobby, you have no right to impose your psychosis on the nation. And it is psychosis. And I'm very deeply disturbed. And so, can we really have someone with deep psychological problems like this in charge of our nation's healthcare system? People are dying. You're cutting off research. You're firing everyone on the vaccine committees, on the research committees. This is dangerous stuff. And of course, by endorsing Trump, he's endorsed everything he ever fought against.
Exactly.
Look, Trump is undoing all the environmental laws that Bobby fought for. He's undoing all the global warming. To Bobby Kennedy, the issue of global warming was paramount. And now he's joined up with Agent Orange to say, well, let the planet burn. Bobby, what's happened to you? And I was at a Trump rally in Georgia. And, you had all these, I hate to say white Georgians who tend to be larger station wagons, and they're all with their MAGA stuff. And then there's a little group of skinny vegans who have a little tent, and they were the Bobby Kennedy contingent. Make America Healthy Again. They had chin-up bars and exercise bicycles for the Trumpsters who were eating their deep-fried Snickers bars. And I said, why should we vote for Bobby Kennedy? Or why should we, accept his choice of President Trump? And they said, well, he can do 30 chin-ups. And I said, I didn't know that was a qualification, but I could do 30 chin-ups if I did as many steroids as he did. That's the other problem is that Bobby's against anything in a needle unless it's a steroid. And I'm sorry, Bobby. I've seen him. What happened to you? He was always a strong guy, very athletic, no question. But now he's a cartoon, and you're not going to tell me that doesn't come out of a needle. I don't buy it, Bobby. You know what? You hang out with Joe Rogan, Mr. Steroid. I don't buy it at all. So, it was very frightening to see him do this crazy stuff. And I have to call him out. Bobby, you are not fit for office. You're not fit for office.
What you just pointed out as far as what you found with him and the state that you actually saw him with, the mental state that you saw him with, and that the president of the United States also saw him fit to represent HHS, which had CDC and everything else under him. That's a problem. But then again, when you look at who our president is, it almost seems like we're completely governed by crazies.
Well, it's beyond crazy. It's vicious.
Yes, that too.
For example, the indictment of Comey. That's sick. And you do it. One thing, I'm sure it's been done before where a president calls his attorney general and said, I want that guy indicted. But he actually ordered his attorney general to indict an American citizen, former head of the FBI, but an American citizen on a tweet on his semi-truth, ordering his attorney general to fire the prosecutor, who was, by the way, was a right-wing Republican who was very, very MAGA himself, but he said there's no evidence, to fire him and then indict. And in 2 days, with a brand new prosecutor, took an entire 2 days after they did 2 years of research on this matter. And in 2 days, they indict an American citizen on the orders of the president. That is fascism. I don't throw that word around easily. That's dictatorship, when someone can point at you and say, Berto Willies, I want that guy indicted. Now, Comey's high enough profile that he'll be able to stop this. Look, he's not without his resources. I mean, Trump has swallowed the grenade on this one, I think. But
don't you find it ironic that the guy who probably allowed the election of Donald Trump, probably stewarded the election of Donald Trump with what he did to Hillary right at the end of that campaign, that Donald Trump turns around and does this to him? Is that ironic or what?
Well, it's ironic. I mean, by the way, I don't think that Comey did anything wrong by releasing information. We don't want information secret before an election.
True.
And I don't think, by the way, I don't think in Michigan, which, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania were the deciding
There's some other things
I don't remember anyone in those states talking about Hillary Clinton or her emails. That wasn't the issue.
Right.
In those states, it was more NAFTA. But nevertheless, there's no indication anywhere that Comey is some type of remember, by the way, Comey's a Republican. He's a registered Republican.
Yes,
That's
he
the
is.
irony of all this.
And a very conservative one.
Yeah. And so what's happening is that Trump is angry at the people he appointed, like Jerome Powell. People forget he's the one who put Powell in. He removed, he removed Janet Yellen, brilliant economist. And ironically, Janet Yellen was for lower interest rates. So he puts in Powell, who's for higher interest rates. And now he's screaming about Powell. Well, buddy, that was your choice. But that's about policy. I'm talking about personal attacks, vicious. Now, it's hard for him to go after Comey, but he might go after Egberto Willies next. It's like the McCarthy era. You pick out some high-profile people, you destroy them, then you go after people en masse that no one's ever heard of, but they all lose their jobs. You're going to see hundreds of professors fired. You're going to see organizations shut down, and I don't know how long you are going to be able to continue.
We are actually,
that's no joke.
That's what I like to tell the audience. Let me tell you what, there was a conservative commentator last week that I was about to get a clip of what she said, and she said, well, we've already lost the mainstream media. The mainstream media has already acquiesced to what Donald Trump wants them to do. And she said the only thing standing now is what we do, independent media. And the thing about it is Donald Trump put a test out there after Charlie Kirk's murder. And what he did is he wanted to see, and it's done through his minions, of course, he wanted to see how people were going to respond to all the firings that are occurring. You say something, who the hell is Charlie Kirk? I mean, I'm sorry, I do not justify his murder or anything. I do not. But that said, why is a professor saying something about Charlie Kirk, pointing out how the despicable character that he was? Why does that sanction that professor being fired? And they've done it with professors, they've done it with environmental, they've done it with just about everybody in every profession where we find people now scared to speak. Bobby Kennedy, you speak up again. I mean, they're doing a whole lot of things right now. And the only solution, as I've been preaching and others have been preaching, I've heard Tom Hartman talk about it as well, is we cannot give in and we cannot shut up. Continue, my brother.
Well, I mean, we can't shut up, but they can shut us up. They can shut us down. I mean, by the way, if you do go see my film or download it, stream it, Vigilantes Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen, you will see Charlie Kirk, who's part of the group that, when I talked about those vigilante attacks, he was part of the group mounting the attacks on voters of color, this Ku Klux Klan plan of mass challenges. Understand, by the way, and so you don't consider that hate speech? I don't know. How about hate action? How about just pure vicious racism and fraud against voters? There's not voter fraud.
Greg, it was unadulterated
fraud against
hate. Yeah, it was unadulterated hate. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it hate or you can call it, I don't know about his emotions, maybe even worse. I don't know if he hates anyone. I think he just wanted people of color off the voter rolls because their color tends to be blue when they vote. So that's how it works. You know, it's like, that's his objection. I don't think he hates black people. I think he just doesn't like the color of their vote. And so it's a vicious attack, but it's still using Ku Klux Klan methods. I'm sorry, does not make Charlie Kirk a great rational guy. You know, like I almost threw up listening to, hearing Peggy Noonan say, oh, well, he brought rational discourse to America. He made no. When you are on a campaign to remove people of color from the voter rolls, that's about as anti-American as it gets. I don't know whether you call it hate speech, but I'll call it vicious racist action. He may not be a racist, may not have been a racist internally. I don't know. He may have black friends. I have no idea. But so what? He may go dancing cheek to cheek with black people. But if he's taking away their vote, that is the worst, most violent form of racism that you can imagine other than lynching. It's electronic, electoral lynching. And that is vile and violent in my book. Does that mean you should get shot? Oh, my God, no. I don't want someone to say, well, I disagree with you, Palast. I'm going to blow your head off. No, please. Let's stop. No more bullets. No more bullets. Right, left, center, no more bullets. Okay, we can't win an argument with bullets or fists, please. And that's a serious plea. And there's no joy in that, and especially there's no joy in seeing someone with kids die. That's not how we got to win this battle. We have to win it with our force of our heads, our words, our actions, our nonviolent actions. And damn it, one thing, if you're listening to this show, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. I'm going to ask you to check your registration. Go to vote.org and see if you've been challenged, if you've been purged from the voter rolls before the 2024 election. According to the U.S. government, no one checks these figures. I do. 4,777,000 people were removed from the voter rolls. And I can tell you, I went through those lists, 66% wrong. I had the best statisticians in the country go through this material. I used to teach statistics myself. So Trump won the election by removing voters he didn't like. And we're just at the beginning of that. And that's the dangerous thing. And the problem is Bobby Kennedy was a voting rights advocate. How could he stand there next to that man who is mass challenging voters of color? His father, he used to say, it was kind of creepy. And I understood because he had his mental issues and, he went through trauma. And what I've learned of trauma is that mental trauma is that if something happens to you, like when his dad was shot in front of him when he's 11, you tend to revert to that speaking when you're 11. And he would suddenly become a little boy and talk about his daddy looking at him from heaven and watching him. Well, hey, Bobby, if your daddy's looking at you from heaven now, what do you think he's thinking?
Exactly.
What do you think he's thinking? He literally, his father saved Martin Luther King's life. Not many people know this story. King was arrested in Georgia, and they knew he was going to get lynched. And the family, by the way, Daddy King had endorsed Nixon against John Kennedy for president. The King family were long-term Republicans and friends of Richard Nixon. So they called their buddy Richard Nixon and Daddy King said, my son's about to get murdered, lynched. He's in the control of the Georgia police, which is the same as the KKK, and they're going to kill him. Please do something. And Nixon said, well, the election's in 2 weeks. I can't do anything now. Unbelievable. And then so Daddy King called Harris Wofford, a friend of the Kennedys, who called Bobby. And Bobby said, I'm going to save his life. And he called his brother John. And John said, Jesus, we'll lose all these southern states if we save King's life. And Bobby said, we have to. He said, yeah, do it. So Bobby called a judge in Georgia, and they knew Bobby was going to be in charge as Attorney General. They call a judge in Georgia and they say, you better get King out of there. And he did. And he saved Kennedy, he saved Martin Luther
I don't
King's
think that's
life.
a well-known.
So imagine
Yeah.
what King would say. What King would say to Bobby Jr. now. What would his daddy say to Bobby Jr. now? This is sad. This is horrible, and I wouldn't even bring it up. He's a friend, or he was a friend. My friend is gone. It's like my friend mentally died, and there's this other weird guy in his place who's turned orange. How do they all turn orange, by the way? What's with that, Bobby? Why you turn orange?
Yeah, I mean that it is sad, right? It is sad, but you know what? And by the way, I didn't know that story that you just told. This is
Yeah.
the first time I'm hearing that story. Is that a well-known story, or is that just something
No,
Bobby told you?
but I am a friend of Martin Luther King III. He's the one who told me about gave me that story, and then I checked it out with Bobby, and checked it out with others, and it is absolutely 100% true. And in fact, that's the reason John Kennedy won the presidency, because Daddy King wrote a pamphlet. They printed 500,000 of them, and they went to almost every black church in America before the election, saying, please, you can vote for the heartless candidate, Nixon, or you can vote for the man with the heart, the senator from Massachusetts. And that turned Illinois and Michigan to the Kennedy camp, because he was going to lose that otherwise. Instead, remember, you had a lot of African Americans who were voting Republican because Jim Crow was the Democratic Party thing.
Oh yeah.
And
In
so
fact,
yeah.
but the black people had an affinity for the Republican Party a lot of times because of Lincoln and all that kind of stuff in the past. So I mean, that switch occurred at the same time the Democratic Party also became the party of the Dixiecrats, etc. But anyhow, give me a closer. First of all, about Bobby, and also what's in the future for you.
Okay, well, number one, go to gregpalast.com. You can read the article. I was with Bobby Kennedy Jr. when he lost his mind. That's gregpalast.com. I also get the film Vigilantes and my continuing reports. And I'm now working with the DiCaprio family and Robert De Niro and others, but most important, working with the Osage Nation, the American Indian tribe that was a subject of the film Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm doing the sequel as a documentary. And we're going to tell you this film, if you go to gregpalast.com, the teaser is that it's all about the origin of the Coke billions, the purloined billions. You know, that the Cokes, you'll find out the Cokes made their first billions by stealing it from this tribe, stealing $2 billion worth of oil. That's how the Cokes became the rich powers they are, by stealing the good old-fashioned American way, stealing it from the Indians. And so that's what I'm working on. You get more of that information at gregpalast.com. And stay with Egberto, because where else are you going to get this stuff? Where else are you going to hear this? You ain't going to hear it anywhere but on Egberto and a few very good progressive outlets. Like, I do work with Tom Hartman very closely, one of your buddies. And I have to say that what a privilege to speak with you again.
Well, look, I appreciate you being here, Greg. Before you go, somebody, Jules says, Greg, we also need you to investigate the 2 lynchings in Mississippi. And I'm sure you've heard about those. And look, I want to thank you for all the work that you do. Folks, Greg is not only at his gregpalast.com, but he's now also on Substack.
Yes,
Greg Palast Investigates. Greg Palast Investigates. Look, before I close, we have to support all of these independent media channels. Why? Because, again, the mainstream media they have already acquiesced to everything the Trump administration wants. So, folks, we've got to keep a vibrant independent media. We want to thank Greg Palast, an investigative reporter that has worked with BBC and many others. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that you continue to do. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
See you in Substack. Thanks.
I do want you to know how much I value you and value your dedication to this process. You see, most people don't know that when I was just a little younger than I am now, once I got old, I actually started off in politics. I became a county party chair. And I was a county party chair in East Texas, in Bowie County, Texas. And, things are interesting in rural parts of Texas. But I was never going to give up. So I spent most of my time behind the scenes supporting other candidates. Listen, I believe that we can absolutely turn Texas blue. But I don't believe that that is up to one person. I believe that it is a team. And it's going to take everybody in this room and everybody that y'all go out and touch to get it done. There you go. We can do it. We're going to do it.
Yes.
So a lot of people say, well, Congresswoman, you're crazy. Ain't no turning Texas blue. And I'm here to tell them this. It's actually not even about turning Texas blue. We are blue. Okay, y'all act like y'all don't believe it. Yeah. We need some more precinct chairs. We are blue. When you look at the state of Texas, we're a non-voting state. That's the problem. We have one of the lowest voter turnouts in the entire country. A lot of people looked at Georgia and never thought that they could end up with 2 senators in one cycle, but they did. Do you know how they got there? They turned people out. The more people that vote, the better our chances are of winning. Why do you think the Republicans are constantly going and introducing voter suppression bills? Because they understand your power. The policies that we're getting right now, they're not popular with anybody, including Trump's own base. No one likes the idea of waking up not knowing whether or not they're going to have Social Security. No one likes the idea of waking up not knowing whether or not their Medicaid or Medicare is going to disappear. No one likes waking up knowing that they're paying their fair share in taxes while billionaires are paying nothing. No one likes that. I don't care what your political affiliation is. I am here to tell you that we have a message for all Texans, and not just some Texans. As rural Texans see that their hospitals are shutting down, that is because of their policies, not ours. It is important that you go and spread the good news. Listen, it's a Sunday right now, y'all. Y'all gonna have to get out in these streets and bring them on in, just like you would bring them into the church. You're gonna have to tell them that we were divided. And divided you fall, united we stand. So I'm here to tell you that Texans are ready to stand united. Because our policies will win. Up and down the ballot, it will be wins for all Texans. Getting broadband expanded, making sure that we've got good paying jobs. We finally need to raise the minimum wage. We've got work to do, and we can do it if we just put the right people in office. So instead of having a senator that wants to ignore the 30 million people that they were elected to serve, how about we get a senator that decides that they understand what it means to serve the people? So with that, I know y'all got a lot of business going on. So I'm just going to say, if enough is enough, then it's time for us to stand up and let them know that we are Texas tough. God bless you all.
We are talking about, we have very high tariffs right now. And I would say to some extent, I can understand the high tariff on EVs, these EVs. I can understand that we screwed up as a country. Our electric vehicle industry fell behind. Remember though, that tariff mechanism is, I want everybody to hear this, it's an anti-capitalist notion, because again, it goes against the principle about supposedly the efficient allocation of resources. The efficient allocation of resources is for us to go ahead and just import a whole bunch of EVs that are much less expensive from China. That is what capitalism dictates that we do. Do I agree with that? No, I want us to have a robust EV market. Now, we leave these things for the private sector to do. But right now, the private sector, as Jack just pointed out, is failing. With Ford scaling back on EVs, when China is scaling up, when China is the resource that the rest of the world is using for EV, that is telling us as a country that we will be that much further behind in EVs. And we will never have the efficient allocation of resources when it comes to EVs, because again, here we are. As China expands, we throw a whole lot of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and at the same time, because it's not in a very profitable state, our private sector is backing off of EVs. That makes sense. It makes no sense, and it speaks ill of the future when it comes to our ability to join the markets of the future, the electric market of the future. Because again, we're doing nothing to make things better. And that ties into the story, one of the stories that I'm covering that Mayana read. And that has to do with Trump and wind energy, right? Look, Trump willy-nilly is going ahead pausing a lot of environmental programs. And why is he doing that? Because as these programs grow, guess what happens? Our dependence falls. And when you have the dependence of oil falling, what does that mean to the oil companies? Their source of revenues fall. But were these oil companies doing what they claim capitalism is supposed to do, which is the efficient allocation of resources, which means as oil use decline, as we see the externalities of oil, we start investing, using our excess profits to invest in alternative forms of energy. So as those alternatives grow, for those who want that to be in the form of corporations, the corporations simply transition from oil to these new forms of energy. There was a time that BP, through its marketing, was trying to say that that's what they're going to do. British Petroleum. They actually made, in their advertising, they made those symbols mean something else. It wasn't BP in their advertising. It was Beyond Petroleum. Have you seen an ad from BP recently speaking about Beyond Petroleum? I haven't. If you have, please let me know, but I haven't. So it is important for us to understand that where we lead and how we lead can determine our futures. And right now, what we have done with the election of Donald Trump is put us backward. I want to just read a piece of this Al Jazeera article, and then we'll proceed. Trump pauses more offshore wind projects, citing national security concerns. What? These guys just say stuff. The administration of the United States President Donald Trump has suspended leases on 5 large-scale offshore wind projects over what it called national security concerns, sending shares of offshore wind companies plunging. The suspension on Monday of the Atlantic Coast projects, which was already under construction, was the latest blow for offshore wind developers that have faced repeated disruptions under Trump. The U.S. president has said he finds wind turbines ugly, costly, and inefficient. All of those are lies, while pursuing a larger pivot away from renewable energy. The man is pivoting away from renewable energy. Shares in Danish energy firm Ørsted, which owns 2 of the affected projects, traded down more than 12% by late morning, with the companies like Dominion and Equinor also trading lower. The U.S. Department of Interior said that Department of Defense had raised concerns that the movement of huge turbine blades offshore wind projects, as well as highly reflective that hold them down, could cause radar interference that could make it hard for the military to identify and locate threats. That's a lie. From somebody, let me just tell you this, all right? it is true that there will be change in signals, whether it's be sonic, electromagnetic, meaning bombarding that area with let's say radar, etc., would look different. But guess what we would have? We will have a footprint of, we would know, anybody writing software and putting in would know what the baseline footprint of whatever you have in the ocean looks like. A big wave in the ocean gives a footprint signaling on radar that's dependent on mass, sending something out and the signal coming back because it hit some form of mass, etc. That is an right. And again, when we don't teach science in schools as we should anymore, they can come up with stupid statements like this and just have people believe it. Okay? We have things called signatures, right? Every solid piece of something getting a radar hit has some sort of a signal. A windmill would have a signal in its static state, and it'll have a signature in its state of motion, what it looks like on these equipment in its state of motion. And those signals can be extracted from whatever else occurs. It is a lie. And I don't even have to look at studies to know that this is a lie. That is a lie of physics. Okay? The prime duty of the United States government is to protect the American people, Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum said in a statement. The pause will give relevant federal agencies time to work with leaseholders and state partners to assess the possibility of mitigating the national security risk posed by these projects. The pause will affect Ørsted Revolution Wind and Sunrise Wind projects, Avangrid and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, Vineyard Wind 2 project, Dominion Energy Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind, and Equinor Empire. I want you guys to notice a tie-in that I'm going to make here. Where are a lot of wind companies located again? They're Genesis, a lot of them, in a country called Denmark. And what is Donald Trump trying to do right now? Somehow get a foothold in Greenland. And what's special about Greenland again? It is currently under, and I don't believe in colonialism, right? But the state of the state of the geography right now is the state of the geography right now. And right now, the state of the geography is that Greenland is under the auspices of Denmark. But let me finish with the windmill, and then I'll try to do some tie-ins there. The pause will affect Ørsted Revolution Wind and Sunrise projects, Avangrid and Copenhagen, and many other. The National Ocean Industries Association, a trade group representing offshore wind development, urged the administration to end the pause quickly. The regulatory process involves a rigorous framework for assessing the national security implication of proposed projects, and every project under construction has already undergone review by the Defense Department and NOAA. Ørsted, Equinor, and Copenhagen Infrastructure were not immediately available for comment. Dominion said the suspension will threaten grid reliability for its Virginia customers, including military bases and data center power intelligence. The anti-wind stand of the Trump administration. Monday's move was the latest instance of the administration ordering a pause to offshore wind projects already under construction. Again, one of the things that corporations and business want is stability. Trump wakes up today and he thinks windmills are ugly and he stops the project. He thinks for type of solar panels he doesn't like, he stops the project. A lot of folks in New Hampshire I think it was New Hampshire or Maine, I don't remember which state, electricians that voted for Donald Trump got laid off. Why? Because he doesn't like renewable energy, so he stops it. And this is not only inconsistent for free enterprise and capitalism. Remember, I believe in free enterprise, I believe they're different, even though our businesses and the media would like to conflate the two. One gives you freedom, the other one takes your freedom away. Remember that. One gives you freedom, the other one takes your freedom away. And they don't advertise it that way, but look at the structure of corporations. Look at the structure of laws that are written for corporations that tell you that if you decide to harm a corporation's way of being, they can actually sue you to recover what they deem are lost income based on something you have done. They don't tell you that, or they don't teach you that when they're teaching you capitalism, do they? but that is the law. The thing about it is most of us don't have that influence to do things. But if your city goes ahead and put a path that breaks some corporation's pipeline or tells a corporation they have to move a pipeline, the city can be sued and they can say that'll have a material effect on our corporate business. And as such, we are suing the state for damages. A lot of people don't understand things can happen like that and have happened like that. But anyhow, let's get back to the subject of wind and Donald Trump and more. So here we go. The guy has put doubt in all these companies that have already invested billions of dollars in offshore windmill that will also bring very much needed electricity to the East Coast and other places because Donald Trump is using the pretext of national security. Like he's blowing up ships in the middle of the Pacific off of Colombia, in the Atlantic off of Venezuela, under the theory that somehow these are drug boats and we're protecting America. All lies. We have a foreign policy based on lies. We have domestic policies based on lies. And we continue to accept it. Now, I want to tie some of this in to Greenland. Greenland is not a territory of Denmark. It falls under a special relationship. And actually, the relationship is not as close, but similar to what we have with Puerto Rico. As you know, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. Greenland is considered a quasi-Denmark territory, though in 2009, they got a higher level of autonomy. So in effect, they're closer to an independent country than is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico would be closer to a United States state if Congress passed laws, etc. But Greenland citizens, hear this out well. Greenland citizens are constitutional citizens of Denmark. In other words, Denmark citizens have absolutely all rights of any Danish citizen born in Denmark. So does Greenland citizens. Greenland, however, have its own parliament, autonomy, except for foreign policy, etc. They run most of their own stuff in Greenland, almost like a very independent state. Puerto Rico, while everybody in Puerto Rico are United States citizens, that was done by statute, not constitutionally. In other words, the statute says born in the territory of Puerto Rico makes you a citizen. But Congress at any time could revoke that because it's not constitutional. It is by statute, meaning it's made into law. Difference. But consider this. Given that loose relationship, consider some other country going into Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands and trying to convince these folks to separate themselves from the United States of America. That is what we are doing in Denmark. We're trying to tell them they can. By the way, the citizens of Greenland, who are Danish citizens by constitution, they can decide to vote that territory to be an altogether independent nation. They could if they wanted to. But they don't. The last poll was 85% of them want to remain under the current relationship with Denmark. And that's why it is so upsetting, not only to Greenland, but also to Denmark that the United States is trying to get involved in some sort of an issue with Greenland. Again, and why would they do that? They would do that mostly because just like we want to get into the business of Venezuela, not because of drugs, but because of Venezuela's natural resources. And it's not only about oil. Venezuela is a country so rich with natural resources that we have pushed into poverty. Not people, socialism through Venezuela into poverty. That's a lie. That is a lie. Norway is not in poverty, and Norway controls its natural resources in a social manner. People benefit from the sovereign fund out of the petroleum from Norway. That is the kind of stuff Hugo Chavez was trying to build in Venezuela. But will the American government allow that to happen? No. Look at what they're doing right now. well, look, Maduro has been there long enough, and it's been decades we've been trying to retake the natural resources of Venezuela. So we put an armada in front of Venezuela and we start pirating oil out of Venezuela. So in Denmark, the Danish are reacting. Officials in Denmark and Greenland were furious on Monday that President Trump has appointed a special envoy to Greenland, part of his efforts to take over the semi-autonomous Danish territory. Mr. Trump announced on social media late Sunday that he was appointing Governor Jeff Landry of Louisiana, a political ally, to the position. Denmark's foreign minister quickly criticized the move as totally unacceptable and said he would summon the American ambassador in Copenhagen for an explanation. It appeared that first time the United States had appointed a special envoy to Greenland. That puts the island of fewer than 60,000 inhabitants in a small group of foreign policy priorities, including Ukraine and the Middle East, for which Trump has appointed trusted allies. In other words, people that have no experience in doing this kind of stuff. Mr. Landry quickly made it clear that he understood what Mr. Trump wanted from him. It's an honor to serve you in the volunteer position to make Greenland a part of the United States. I want you to pause there. Imagine another country coming out and saying, we are sending an attaché to Puerto Rico to speak to the governor of Puerto Rico in order to talk to Puerto Rico about becoming a part of, let's say, Denmark. So Denmark sends its warships over to Puerto Rico and an envoy and say, hey, how would you like to become a part of Denmark? I mean, it's not quite a one-to-one because there's some more statutory things that would be of impact. But you get the point that I'm talking about. Greenland has critical minerals that have attracted the interest of top officials in the Trump administration, and it served as a base for American military operations during World War II and the Cold War. There is still a remote American base on the island, northern side. In this post, Mr. Trump wrote, Jeff understands how essential Greenland is to our national security, but appointment drew condemnation from Greenland and further deteriorated the relationship between the United States and Denmark, which used to be close allies. And not only that, Denmark is a part of the, what again? European Union, part of the NATO. And this is simply Trump's nuttiness, right? You cannot annex other countries. Prime Minister of Denmark and Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen of Greenland said in a joint statement on Monday. Not even by invoking international security, Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders and the United States must not take over Greenland. Mr. Nielsen added in a statement on Facebook that the appointment may sound big, but doesn't change anything for us at home. We decide our future ourselves. Denmark has exercised various forms of control over Greenland for centuries and absorbed it into its kingdom in 1953. Today, Greenland manages its own domestic affairs with project subsidies up to 60% by Denmark, which also manages its defense and foreign policy. Many Greenland's leaders support independence but differ on how soon that should happen and whether to build a closer relationship with the United States. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Denmark's foreign minister, told Danish television on Monday that he was deeply upset by Trump's announcement and he planned to summon Ken Howery, who became the American ambassador. And there's much more to the article that I won't get into directly. But again, what we're doing here is tantamount to simply going to an independent country and saying, because we believe you to be in our national interest to own you, to make you a part of us, we'll just do it. What happens when we decide that the location of France, or even let's say let's see something more sensible. Let's say that we figured out that the location of Spain on the Mediterranean makes it of such national interest to us that we need to control it. You think we would do it? I mean, we have to start we have to start looking at things the way they really are. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. None whatsoever. So Denmark, thank you for starting us where you started us, both Jack and Mayana. I think it is high time that we start looking at these things from an American citizen point of view. And that is we have an administration that is dearly pulling us back. Numero uno, when it comes to energy, as I pointed out. Notice all the Danish companies that are into wind power. And thus, when we talk about sovereignty of countries whom we want to steal their resources, which is exactly what's happening. This has nothing to do with capitalism. This has nothing to do with free enterprise. This has everything to do with imperialism and the theft of the resources of others. And when we look at it under that context, we should do something about it. And that starts in the electoral process. And that continues in the elections that we'll start having here in Texas in March, the primaries. It's important. It is important that those that are listening here make sure and populate those primaries with your bodies and ensure that the people get elected are forward-thinking people. And who are the forward-thinking people? By definition, progressives. No ifs, no buts, by definition, progressives. And that is what the country is calling for now. That is what the country is begging for now. That is what the country is urging.
All of our country's problems, from polarization to ignorance on domestic and international issues to a complete misunderstanding of our economic and healthcare systems, are a direct result of a derelict mainstream media that too often bend over backwards to support corporate or bought politicians' wants as opposed to the people's needs for real information to make their lives better. Independent media is the only solution to inform truthfully and factually. Why? Because our loyalties are to you, the ones who fund us with small dollar contributions and subscriptions. Please consider supporting our independent media platforms by subscribing to our Egberto Off the Record newsletter at politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Again, that is politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. It's an investment that pays incalculable